Hi, my name is Armin Talic. I'm the Commercial Director for a digital consultancy called Komodo Digital. So we're experts in user experience design and development for web and mobile. We've worked in social housing as a sector for around about 4 years now. We've worked both with software suppliers into that sector, improving their user interfaces and products that have touch points both internally in the housing organization, but also tenants directly through things like self-service. And we've also worked with a number of housing organizations directly to understand the needs of some of their tenants and actually deliver that through a better web experience. Why are resident experiences important? I think ultimately the experience of a resident and a tenant is a measure of the effectiveness of a housing organization. It's ultimately one of the key KPIs. So it's not just thinking about online experiences, it's not just thinking about offline experiences, it's how does the ecosystem of kind of touch points for a resident and a tenant, how does that affect their experience? So the way that we kind of look at it is ultimately when you look at housing associations that have positive trending tenant experiences, you also see positive trends in their other KPIs. So ultimately, the kind of assumption that you can relatively easily make is that positive tenant experiences lead to positive KPIs across the rest of the business. So I think ultimately it's really easy to assume that tenants having a positive experience only benefits the tenants, but ultimately if you look at the way that that you're measuring experience, so there's many different popular ways to measure that. So Net Promoter Score, NPS, is often something that you can use to measure the sentiment of tenants. So are they happy with the particular experience that they've had? Are they happy with stuff that they've done in the past? But ultimately, positive tenant experiences and tenant engagement look like the day-to-day interactions that they have. So that may well be how intuitive is the tool that they're using for self-service? Is it mobile friendly? Is it designed in a way that actually makes sense for them? Or is it just a desktop experience shrunk down? So that's a way to measure experience as opposed to just, are you happy? Are you kind of in the middle, or are you sad about a particular experience? So I think the idea that only tenants benefit from a positive experience is a bit of a counterintuitive one, because ultimately the housing association that has the most engaged, the most broad reach of tenants with positive engagement, they ultimately see positive numbers in terms of phone calls that they receive, in terms of repeat repair requests, in terms of engagement online with their self-service portals. So I think effectively happy tenants in a broad term, in terms of the interactions and the tools and the services that they interact with, lead to happy housing organizations. I think the challenges at the moment, they're quite broad in the housing sector. So if you look at the traditional nomenclature that people use to define some of those challenges, it's digital transformation. So broadly, it's looking at existing tools and services and thinking, how do we leverage these existing tools, some of which may be offline, some of which may be online, and how do we better present these as an interaction to our tenants? So digital transformation's generally a term that's thrown about really easily, but ultimately I still don't really think by the majority is understood as simply evaluating offline and online services and how to improve them for modern day expectations. So you look at tenants and what their expectations are. Housing tenants in social housing are the same as people who live in houses, right? So they have Amazon-like retail expectations, they have Apple-like software expectations, they have expectations that their email is as straightforward as Gmail. So ultimately, I think trying to provide digital experiences, but also offline experiences and kind of touch points that meet the ever-increasing kind of outside of housing, the ever-increasing expectations of tenants, and using that kind of technology, that workflow, that process to influence how we better represent our software and services to tenants. I think that's ultimately the first challenge, and I think really it's how do we measure how well we're doing at the moment, and how do we use that as a factor to influence what we look at first, what we incrementally improve, and then understanding how those improvements have changed the experience and whether or not it's positive or to the negative. So I think really the challenges are to simplify thinking as it stands, because innovation as a whole isn't one big piece of software that you launch. Innovation is more about the way that you approach a problem, the way that you work with it, and how you measure specifically the kind of demonstrable impact and improvements of that. So where are there opportunities for improvements? Ultimately, I guess it leads on from some of the challenges. I think you need to really measure the existing experiences and outputs of your tenants. You need to understand what those metrics and what those measures mean. You need to look at simple, incremental, methodical ways to improve it, and then rinse and repeat that process. So it's effectively measure, understand, improve, repeat. So I think where there is a clear need to, I guess, embody that as a kind of functional experience is in the likes of tenant experience portals or tenant feedback portals. So if you want to better engage with tenants, residents to understand how their experiences are affecting them. So say, for example, you're thinking about launching self-service and you want to understand what self-service really needs to do and look and feel like for your tenants, having something like a tenant engagement service, whether that's an offline paper form that some tenants fill out, whether that's an online SurveyMonkey form, keeping it simple to capture that information, or it looks like a centralized engagement hub where tenants can respond to feedback requests. They can provide direct feedback about an experience. They can provide direct input about a potential output that the business is looking to create for them. I think that's probably one direct, specific, and measurable way of engaging with tenants, is providing them simple tools that they often have in other experiences. So when you buy something online, you often get asked to provide feedback and leave a review out of 5 stars. It's becoming more common in housing, but that kind of retail, that follow-up, that constantly connected experience doesn't really exist in a lot of common examples. So I think looking at how you better engage with tenants through specific engagement portals or tools, that may be one of the solutions. So I do think digital channels can help. I think using channels in the right way based on the most common type of interaction through that channel is the approach to take. So take social channels, for example, Twitter. So the reason why people use Twitter is it's quick, it's convenient, and it allows them to say something short in a really easy way. So if somebody wants to complain, they are likely to take to Twitter because they want to publicly vocalize their issue. So the idea that utilizing channels in the way that they're best suited for. So Twitter is probably high volume transactions. If you have, let's say you've got 30,000 units as a housing organization, you're probably going to be engaging with a couple of hundred people in a given week, rather than using human resource to answer the same question constantly, or actually actively and proactively interact with people that have issues. Why not look at automating that? So there's common kind of chatter in the sector about using chatbots. Ultimately, that's if you assume people want to interact directly with a chatbot. There are ways to leverage automated interactions, tools and services that allow you to automatically respond to a complaint and funnel that to the right person, as opposed to needing a person to respond and then figuring out where that should go. So I think using the correct channel for the correct reason. So high volume transactions and interactions should be automated ideally. More personalized experiences and actions should be done one-to-one, because you shouldn't think about automating everything. So I think looking at the existing social and offline and online channels that you have, and understanding why do those channels exist in the first place, how does your audience actually predominantly use that channel, and therefore tailoring a specific way to interact with that channel and through that service specific to your organization. I think that's the approach to take with better leveraging existing channels. So I think there's obviously a few barriers to making a lot of this happen. I think recognizing those barriers in the first place is important to being able to then actually deliver some of this change. So I think some organizations clearly have opportunities to upskill their own team. So that may well look like internal training opportunities, or that may well look like people you're already looking to recruit that have experience of this. So I think you've always got to look internally to understand how are you best suited to deliver on some of this, because ultimately it's not just going to be an external or outward supplier that helps you deliver that change and that kind of incremental, innovative thinking and working. a lot of that is embodied by your organization internally. So looking inwards is important in terms of trying to deliver some of this change, and some of those barriers are going to be inwards, whether it's organizational, cultural, workflow wise, or kind of business logic and structure. I think the real thing is there are no big firework examples where say, for example, you spend 9 months trying to produce a piece of software that's going to be placed on somebody's device that's a tenant. Really, that's a single project that should ultimately be delivered in an agile way. But a lot of people look at that as an example of digital innovation, that as an example to hang your hat on, whereas really what we look at is how does an organization incrementally improve? How does it maintain inertia where they are thinking about their services and products in a way that it's user-centered, it's design-focused, it's led by the digital experience, and how that digital experience ties up to an offline experience, because those two things have to be joined up. So it's not just about hanging a hat on one specific project, it's about actually being in a position and upskilling your own team through a supplier that you partner with, so that that team can continue to deliver those innovative projects, as opposed to the measure being just successfully delivering a piece of software to a spec. So how we overcome some of those barriers with housing organizations that we work with is ultimately to strip things right back and start to look at ultimately what's the root cause of some of the problems that we're trying to resolve with either a change in workflow, in an upskilling of an internal team, or actually a piece of software we want to design or deliver. The reality is taking the time and perspective to look, I guess, upstream to understand some of those problems is the extra time that we take, because ultimately call volume, if you've got really high call volume, is that being caused by the fact that actually your tenants are just needy and want to call you, or is it being caused by the fact that they don't feel empowered or have the tools and information at hand easily, intuitively, to be able to answer some of those questions themselves? You'll probably find that people would rather help themselves than have to call up or feel like they have to call up, because that's actually the only channel that they have. So what we often find is that the biggest impact we have with organizations we work with, and the biggest benefit to housing associations on a whole, is when they have the opportunity to stop and I guess explode out the problem, to look at it key areas in detail. So to really understand what's going on in a particular service area, whether that's repairs or self-service or registering for a new portal that you're about to launch, how do you get a high amount of adoption and registration and continued use? So we really kind of not just necessarily looking at the technical specification of a product or purely the design and look and feel of a product. It's the amalgamation of what does a particular user need, how are we going to deliver that, what does version 1 of that look like, and what's the methodology to deliver version 1.1 based on feedback, 1.2 based on feedback, and ultimately, where are the measures of that? So I think before changing anything, we can hold ourselves to account to some key metrics. So we often ask our clients, whether it's in housing or not, what is ultimately the measure of success if we deliver something for you? So that needs to be understood in the first place, because that usually leads us to understand in a little bit more detail where the actual problems are coming from. And for us to hold ourselves to account to making sure that when we deliver something, incrementally we start to measure the impact of that, because it's a great feeling when something launches and the actual outcomes of that trend towards what we're expecting. So they're either positive or they're trending towards a positive based on what we've delivered for a client. And then ultimately it's not just about shipping boxes, there it is, we'll see you later. It's about measuring the impact over time. So the majority of our engagements as a supplier is long term, so it's 2 to 3 year engagements, because ultimately a product should change based on the changing needs of a tenant, based on the changing business objectives of a housing organization. So it's not just a one single instance of a solution to overcome a particular problem. It's about the mindset of how we deliver change and improvement to understanding some of those problems. So we've talked a little bit about why tenant engagement and positive tenant experiences are important. We've talked about how to understand where we're doing well and where we're not doing so well engaging with a tenant, some potential tools to to provide to improve those. And actually we've talked about what some of the tangible actions might be to overcome some of those problems and start to create positive incremental changes. The way that we often engage with housing organizations, or actually many different clients that we work in different sectors, is often, I guess it's easy to say, we start at the beginning. So we look at discovering the basics of a problem. So we start with a problem statement, and that statement may well be, we currently don't have a self-service solution for our tenants. We want to provide one. That's as broad as a statement could be, or ultimately it could be even more refined to say we have reporting tools and repair request tools for our tenants, but we don't find our tenants engaging with them enough. So we take that as a statement and we look to effectively break that down in the discovery process. Discovery for us is a set framework of both tools and templated documents so that we can consistently deliver it across every client we have, but also it provides specific demonstrable outputs for clients after discovery. So we want to understand what's the set of users that we're looking to cater for in this particular problem statement. What is the expected output? What are the needs for those people? And ultimately, how does that tie up to the user journeys, the business logic, the actual data that flows throughout, whether it's an offline solution we're looking at, or whether it's an online piece of software that either exists or needs to be retailored or built from scratch. So one of the things that we're doing ourselves is, rather than having that as a completely paid for service at the very outset of the interaction, we want to be able to help housing associations with the ability to actually self-start and do part of that themselves. So we've launched a kit called Bonsai. So Bonsai is our open source toolkit for design discovery. So it will allow you to define your user personas and clearly understand those for a particular problem, and then also start to understand the user needs and expectations and wants. So those two areas are key and pivotal to that kind of complete experience that a tenant is expecting to have. And we think by providing those toolkits, which you can request yourselves, that you're able to start to more clearly understand a problem before you look at things like tendering or selecting suppliers or writing a brief. Really start to understand the problem in a bit more detail, and kits like Bonsai and Design Discovery allow you to do that. So we've talked a little bit about Bonsai, we've talked a bit about the importance of using design discovery at the beginning of a project or even at the inception of a project. If you'd like to request your own Bonsai kit, we have a small selection of kits available on demand for housing associations that we've already created. If you want to email hello@komododigital.co.uk, we'll have a conversation with you first to see what the need is for you, and then we'll ship out one of these kits for you so you can start using it with your team. Thanks very much.